In my role as Athlete Wellbeing Manager, I am privy to so many conversations with our female athletes, and I cannot stress, this is a really important education piece for our athletes and coaches. And just even sitting there, the statistics show that. So this is such a great opportunity for our sport. All the way through. We're not just talking elite, from grassroots through. So thank you so much. We do have lunch now. We're coming back at 2:00. We've got a great afternoon ahead. So I'm going to ask Dr Tiarna Ernst to come back up on stage. And I'm also going to ask to join me Alice Tait. I nearly said Mills straight away, just pops in my head, OAM. She's a former sprint, freestyle, butterfly and individual medley swimmer who represented Australia at the 2004 Athens Olympics and the 2008 Beijing Olympics, where she won 2 gold medals and a bronze. Alice first represented Australia at 15 years of age in 2002. She's a 2-time world record holder, a 5-time world championship medalist. Once she finished swimming, she became a clinical nurse at the Queensland Children's Hospital Operating Theatre, and she's in charge of the surgical delivery of ENT, ears, nose and throat. She's a global volunteer for Operating Smile and a domestic volunteer for Deadly Ears. She's married to 2-time Olympian Gregor Tait, and she's got 2 beautiful kids. Alice, will you come and join us up on the stage? And big round of applause. And I'm also going to join in on this panel. So I've co-opted Annie Williams into coming up to do the facilitating and asking the questions.
Thanks, Linley. Hello, everyone. Delightful to be back. Nothing like a curveball. I have read the questions once, though, so be patient with me. But it's lovely to be here and with Linley and Alice, who I know very well, and Tiarna, who I've met today and did a fabulous presentation. So we've got about half an hour, I think, for this discussion. So as I said, I've read through these questions once, so feel free to provide long answers. But perhaps if we start, and Alice, maybe we'll start with you and then we'll move along the panel, about your background, your experience in sport and the exercise space. Just a little bit more about you.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I mean, you heard my bio, so I don't know if I have too much more to add to that, but I did make my first team as a 15-year-old, so I was very, very young, entering into a very, very grown-up world at the time. When I first made the team, there were some very big personalities on the team, and they subsequently went on to retire within the first 2 years of my career, so I was definitely one of the young ones in a grown-up world. But I enjoyed a decade swimming for Australia, and it's only the further I get away from it, I realise how much fun it was. It used to seem like the most stressful thing in the world, and now I have 2 children who don't put their shoes on, and that's stressful. But yeah, I had Olympic success and world championship success, and faced a lot of mental health challenges throughout my career, physical challenges, and have gone on to work in the healthcare space, mostly because I've always been interested in the health and the body and all that sort of physiological stuff, but also because I think it's a good way to give back to a broader network of people who appreciate the prowess of athletes, because often the people that we work with don't ever or can't ever understand getting to a point like that. So it's nice to be able to somewhat connect the two worlds, but I have enjoyed my decade out of the pool as much as I enjoyed my decade in the pool, I think.
I totally get that. Thanks, Alice. Tiarna, how about you? I know you've just given a big presentation, and I have a 6-month-old baby who I'm still breastfeeding, so I was expressing actually during a part of your presentation. So I guess people have your background, but perhaps and apologies if you sort of gave this introduction, but the reason you were interested in getting, specialising in this particular area.
Yeah, so I'm a born and bred Queenslander. Was born on Thursday Island at the tip of Cape York. Grew up in an Indigenous community and just was naturally athletic, very lucky. Loved to run, hated swimming. Lots of crocodiles and jellyfish up there, so that's probably one of the reasons why I never really got in the pool. But I was, naturally athletic. I was good at school. Went on to study at James Cook University in Townsville and then Cairns, and that's sort of when I came across AFL Women's at AFL Women's competition at the time. Prior to that, I was a national track and field athlete, so that's sort of how I used to compete from an athletic perspective. And then at university studying medicine, that's sort of when I came across AFL Women's. The growth of AFL Women's now is so crazy, and it's amazing that I was there from the beginning and to see now the opportunities that young females have within the AFL women's space. But not only that, but all codes and all individual sports across Australia now. The rise of the female athlete is something I'm really proud to be part of. Studying medicine and obviously then my own, experience as an athlete was the thing that made me really interested in the female physiology and why female athletes have so many differences to male athletes, and so by understanding our bodies better, potentially we could actually be better at our sports and our athletic abilities, and I guess that's probably where my passion, particularly looking at the female physiology and menstrual health and the impact that can actually have on our athletic capabilities, is sort of transpired into obviously my medical career, and then obviously my interest in helping other females, whether they be athletes or not.
Where do I start? I actually moved away from home at the age of 17 and I moved to the Institute of Sport in Canberra. I had 6 years there, and it was the greatest opportunity I think that I've ever been given, and immensely grateful for my time there because of the people that I came across and probably was exposed to. I won the World Championships at 19, which changed my life. Really very special moment. I became an Olympian in 1992, and I stayed on the national team. Pampac's World Short Course Championships, and I retired at the age of 25. I planned to go till 29 to the Sydney Olympics, but I was really sick when I retired. I ended up with chronic fatigue syndrome, and so I was bedridden for a really long time. But during my career, I think, it was the greatest adventure and the greatest opportunity that I've ever been given.
Thanks, Emily. And these are all kind of directed towards all of you. In a little while there'll be some more specific ones. But as elite athletes, do you think your menstrual cycle impacted on your athletic performance during training and also competition? And if so, how did it do that? Maybe Tiarna, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I guess probably with my background knowledge, being a doctor at the time of also playing in the AFL women's space, it was something that I definitely recognised. I guess going back to when I first got my period, I remember cried to my mum. She just threw a box of tampons and pads at me and then walked out. And that was the level of education that I got around menstrual health at the time. And I think that older generation of it's not something to be spoken about is still something that we're still filtering out of all aspects of society at the moment, that we shouldn't talk about female health. Then understanding about what's normal and what's not normal when I was an athlete. I remember running out onto the field playing against Carlton, and it felt like my uterus was about to fall out because I was on day 2 of my period, and it was terrible. So I sought help, and I saw a gynaecologist, and I went on some form of menstrual management to try and control those symptoms so that I could play better, and I felt that for me was what I needed. Now, every athlete is different, and as I mentioned before, the consults I was getting in the ice baths after training by my fellow athletes was something that made me really concerned that we needed to obviously have much more education around that, was that the players were coming to me rather than the medical staff. about their issues, which is then obviously referring them on to the right, down the right avenues was the thing that I had to do. But absolutely, I would get pain. I was lucky enough I didn't have really heavy flow, but definitely the impact upon my ability to run really hard and for long periods of time was definitely prevalent.
Well, going through puberty in a swimsuit is incredibly difficult. It comes with many challenges, and I do remember the box of tampons, and if you want to keep swimming, that you need to learn to use these, and that was just the reality of it. I think, there are so many messages, and I didn't know if they were right. There were the messages of if you get in the water and swim, cramps will go away, and all those kinds of things that we were told along the way. And in some cases that worked. I think probably one of the biggest things that you learnt to do really early was to track your cycle, and the reason you're tracking your cycle is actually to find out if it was going to fall on a competition, and really just an understanding of yourself. So it wasn't sort of specifically for anything else, but you just wanted to know if you could get through a competition without sort of having to worry. I grew up in the era of very, very small swimsuits, and so it's vastly different to what the girls wear when they're competing now, but I wore a girls' 10 swimsuit, so it was tiny, and that was just what came with the sport. If you wanted to be in the sport, it was just really what you dealt with. But many conversations in the change rooms and between everyone that you swam with. It's very much a sisterhood of talking and learning from each other. I think there probably wasn't too much consultation with people that actually were experts in the area, but there was a lot of shared knowledge.
And it sounded like, it was all about how to make sure you didn't have your period during competition, not about, when was the point in your cycle where you had the greatest strength or you felt, you had the most energy or anything like that. It was no sophistication about, no more data than that. Literally just, I don't want to have my period when I'm competing, so what can I do to avoid it?
And I think I would have been fascinated with that data because that was the sort of athlete that I was. So I sat there and watched that presentation, and I hear all of these things, but I would have been drawn to the data of like trying to understand, the right times to do everything.
And Alice, how about you?
My experience was sort of different. I don't know if any of you remember my swimming career, but I, as I said, was 15. Yeah, you remember. And I was a 15-year-old child. Like, I had not gone through puberty at all. And by the time I was 18 and I still had not had my first period, the concern shifted from me not entering that prepubescent phase to me not being able to one day have children. So we started investigating those sorts of challenges when I was very young, which is a strange thing to think about. Like, not many 18-year-olds heavily consider whether they want to be a mother one day. It's more like an abstract thought, but it's not something that you really have to contextualise too much. So I had all sorts of scans for my bone density and things like that, and it actually took my extended break of 6 whole weeks after the Athens Olympics when I first got my first period, because I actually stopped, like my body stopped and I grew a bit and I had time to rest, and I liken it to not being in a state of survival. My body was always in this state of survival that, like, to survive I don't need to procreate, so we're not going to do that just yet. And then I never had a period. So through my swimming career, I was actually on the pill so that I could continue to have a period and I could continue to build up that bone density and all that strength that I was going to need as an older woman one day. But then I went on to stop swimming and continue to not have a period. So I've had different challenges in that my advantages would have come from knowing that it actually is quite abnormal to not have that, and it was never applauded, which was great from my coaches. Like, we always had really good communication around that issue, but it would have been really handy for me to have at least some investigations or resources that I could use and facilitate and apply when I retired, also at 25.
I guess that's quite remarkable that a 6-week break, which is a short period of time, was enough to sort of, for your body to start, having its sort of more regular cycle. Tiarna, hearing that, as a specialist in the area, what does that spark alarm bells, or does that sound like a common theme with, things that you see and hear?
Yeah, I definitely think with elite athletes, you're at risk of having that, as you said, that survival mode. So you're pushing your body to the limits. And so from a physiological perspective, your body's saying, I am in no way ready or capable right now to have a baby. And so that's your body's protective mechanism, I guess, to prevent pregnancy in a state where you may have less calories that's required for a pregnancy, or less rest or less energy. So that story just reminds me that that's your body's way of surviving, I guess. So, and that's something that we have seen in multiple codes of sport across Australia and internationally. Gymnasts are particularly at risk because of their low body weight and body fat percentage, but equally so, even within the AFL women's space, that first season, you had amateur athletes being pushed into an elite space. The training load significantly increased, and half the squad would stop having their periods because it was their body's way of saying, I'm in no way of having a baby right now.
And maybe for Linley and Tiarna, how did you manage, and Alice as well, in the latter part of your career, when you did get your period, how did you manage the symptoms, from day to day? Did you just use sort of pain medication, like Panadol and things like that? How did you manage? I guess, how did you, Yeah,
I was about to say, is it naproxen? I think naproxen was my friend. And I was one of those ones that got awful, prior to getting my period, like quite awful symptoms of being really sore in the boobs and feeling quite uncomfortable. So it was probably just a pain management, but because I tracked where I was, I knew exactly where I was, and that was okay. That's, that will go in a couple of days. I was sort of able to manage it like that.
Yeah, so I guess probably what you're experiencing is those premenstrual symptoms, and each person is very different in terms of the symptoms that they experience. From my experience, I think I guess in the elite space, tracking your cycles is still something that a lot of females, just general community athletes, playing sport on the weekends, they probably still don't know or even have the ability to understand that that's an important thing, that they have power over their body to recognise when they might be feeling certain ways. So I think that's pretty advanced from your generation of athletes, because it's still something that I think that the athletes that are competing at the moment is still something that they're still struggling. Or I've done that presentation to multiple different sporting codes, and usually majority of the time it's athletes, and half the time all their jaws are dropped to the floors because they're like, what do you mean we can track our cycles? Or so it's still just opening that whole conversation piece, because it's something that they've never really spoken about before, other than probably that sisterhood in the change rooms, but without not having the conversation with professionals.
I didn't really have any issues with pain management, but I was also in the space of I never took any medication when I was swimming except for my asthma preventatives, because I was so fearful of something being contaminated. Yeah. So if I had any pain, I just grinned and bared it, which is also not conducive to performing in training or competition, but I didn't allow myself the relief of pain medication until I was well out of the sport.
And you said that as a 15-year-old, it's quite confronting to have to think about whether or not one day you'd want to be a mother. And there were obviously, you said, sort of investigations, and you looked into it, and you were lucky to have support. But did that aspect of your life impact you and your swimming or your training? Did you ever feel like, I don't know if I want to continue with this because perhaps this is going to, perpetuate the risk that I might not be able to have children later? How much information did you have about that?
I probably didn't, well, like I already said, I didn't have enough information about it. There were times when I was really struggling, like as I went through puberty, it felt like it was open fodder for everyone to comment on the fact that I'd gone through puberty. So I would just get endless remarks about like how much bigger I'd gotten, and how I had bigger legs now and bigger thighs now, and you've grown some boobs now, and like all these conversations that would happen around me but not directly to me. So I went into these separate issues with body image and self-esteem and things like that. And there were times when because I was in my early 20s by the time everything really kicked off properly. And I had moments where I considered whether dealing with these self-esteem, body image issues and the chat that came with that was worth it when there's a possibility that I may not ever be able to have children, so why don't I try and do that young? So it wasn't a constant concern of mine, but it was definitely, when I was in my low points, it was something that I considered to be, it could have been a catalyst in stopping my career much earlier. Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, that's a good segue, and I would like you to all to answer. Maybe Linley, I'll start with you. But, you know, how do you think sports organisations can better provide education, training and support for athletes?
Well, I think it starts probably at the state level upwards, but I think there's a really great opportunity to have an honest conversation about what it is actually like growing up, and the research that can be done to facilitate helping this next generation of athletes coming through. So it's not the conversations in the change rooms that are happening so much, and we can get the right people in front of athletes to be able to do it. I mean, we have these great opportunities with our national flippers programs that are delivered in each state. State flippers program, which then goes to the national flippers programs. So, you know, we've got these groups, and I think we do have a great opportunity to really move forward, and I think as an organisation it'd be a brilliant thing to do.
So I think just, you know, us being here today and the partnership with an organisation like City Fertility that takes an interest in female health is probably, you know, I think Swimming Australia being leaders within the female athlete space in that regard. So I think that's probably the one big tick. The second tick, I was talking to Tony Shaw at lunchtime, and he brought up a fantastic point about potentially introducing accreditation, or for re-accreditation, potentially educational resources or educational modules that coaching support staff may need to do to be able to actually keep their accreditations piece. So that means that it's a normal conversation, it's just part of the woodwork, this is what needs to be done, and the knowledge piece that needs to be filtered out throughout our support staff for athletes at all levels of competition and training, so that it's not just, you know, something that's only at the elite space, but it's starting at the, you know, the community and amateur level as well.
Yeah, just piggybacking onto that, I feel like the more that we can normalise the conversation, and great progress has been made towards that, but some people still liken the words of like menstruation and period as feeling dirty coming out of their mouths. Like, it's still a really taboo subject to talk about. And if that can be normalised as normal as, oh, what's your diet like? Oh, what's your period cycle like? Like, everything, all the ducks are there to be lined up to make a great athlete. They're just not all in a row yet. Yeah. So we've got the resources and we've got the people to do it. And now with City Fertility, we've got some backing to possibly do some research down the line that we can have this full package that we can deliver to our young female athletes and current female athletes to build them up and capitalise on the strength that they have.
Well, I just wanted to jump in there because I had a really interesting experience growing up with a coach that was very willing to talk about it, and it became a very normal conversation. My coach was Terry Gathercole, and he himself was two-time Olympian. He was Olympic coach. He was president of Swimming Australia. And I remember him having this conversation with me really early on. I never got to the bottom of it because I never knew if it was true, but the relationship I had was that I trusted him completely. I remember him telling me one day that more world records were broken with girls when they had their period, and that some of the best performances occurred at that time. I never knew whether that was true or not, but the fact and the way that he delivered it to me, I actually went, okay. So the fact that I did track my cycle, it didn't matter whether I had my period at a major competition, and that did occur. And then interestingly, I was talking to another athlete on the Australian team, and she goes, and this is a recent athlete, she goes, I was told the same thing. And so I don't know if it was true, but it actually gave me the confidence to be okay. It was an open conversation. I'd heard stories about colleges in America where they'd noted where people's cycles were, and I think, yeah, if we can do that coach education, make everyone feel comfortable with the conversation, it changes so much in your life as an adult.
Yes, that was perfect. That was going to be my next question, actually, whether or not any of you had had good conversations with your coach. I know, Alice, you mentioned it earlier, but I guess, Linley, perhaps because you're still very, connected with programs and, of course, without breaching any confidentiality, but just sort of broad, sweeping statements, that's amazing that at that time you had such open and honest and so much support from your coach. You are very young, but that was still a little while ago. But, now... have you had any conversations with, I guess, either coaches or athletes, or are you aware of any programs that, maybe not even in swimming, maybe in other sports, that do this really well?
Well, I think we actually started the conversation with Beyond the Black Line. And unfortunately, due to COVID, we stopped our in-person presentations with Beyond the Black Line, and we will pick them up again. But as I mentioned, Libby has some of the most honest conversations about getting your period, using tampons. It was so honest, but it's so relatable. So we deliver those conversations with just girls in the room. And there's multiple conversations about what it's like to go through puberty and things like that. So I think, yeah, we do start those conversations. But the girls certainly talk to each other. It's quite incredible.
And Tiarna, you said that some of the other AFLW players would come to you to ask for information. Did you ever have an honest conversation with a coach that you felt was supportive, or have you heard of others within the AFLW space?
Yes, I definitely think that, I guess with their understanding of my knowledge and background, they respected that I said this is an issue that you need to have a chat about. Whether or not the AFLW are taking it as a serious issue at the moment is probably another thing, and I think they've got lots of other things that they're focusing on at the moment. But there was generally a desire that this is something that needs to be improved in terms of the education. One sporting code that is doing it very, very well is soccer. So the US Soccer World Cup team from 2018, and there's quite a lot of stuff in the media about it, is that they took the menstrual health of their athletes very seriously, and they won the World Cup. And there's a lot of conversation around some of their success coming by their changes of training and recovery, individualised to the particular athlete based on where in their cycle they were. So that's probably a really good example of when codes have taken it very seriously and it's led to significant success. And it's something that all codes probably need to address as the rise of female athletes across all sporting codes increases.
I had 3 equally brilliant, in different ways, coaches across my career. So I started with Shannon Rollison, moved into Tracy Menzies, and then finished up with Glenn Baker. And I never had any hesitancy talking to any of them about any issues I was having with my period or any concerns I had about my future. I do remember the conversation I had with Shannon when I told him I got my period. I came back to training after Athens and he's like, "Do you have a good break?" and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, "Yeah, I got my period." And I was 18, so it did feel like a dirty word coming out of my mouth. And he was like, "Oh, thank God." He does that slap. Thank God. And obviously, training under a female coach, it was a very different experience because they knew exactly what it was like and they could relate to it. But then when I moved to train with Glenn Baker, I was an adult by that time, 24 or something. And he was more open to me dictating my training a bit more, and that involved conversations around how I perform best at whatever state I was within my cycle. So, I haven't swum for a decade, and that's quite a progressive movement, I would say, from the 3 of them. Like, I started training with Shannon when I was 10. So he knew me from childhood to adulthood, and we were able to grow through that development together as well.
Amazing. And what about Tiarna? Oh, sorry, I thought it was a question. What about options for athletes who might want to pursue a family? I mean, we see it more and more now in lots of different sports. Athletes who want to have a baby while they're an athlete and then come back to the sport. I guess, yeah, we're seeing it more and more. And is there any kind of information or data that's being presented about how that impacts women? And I know that there was, then perhaps Linley, I know there's been an example in swimming, so Linley after that might want to comment.
Yeah, so I guess, so to answer your question, the first thing is that I think we need to support women that having a baby or creating a family shouldn't stop their athletic pursuits. So I think that's probably the first thing, is that we need to support women in whatever they want to do. From an evolutionary perspective, we're designed to have babies, so of course lots of women will want to go on to do that. From I guess, concerns about the impact upon their fertility journey on their sport, one really good option for women is fertility preservation, and it's becoming an increasingly more popular thing for lots of women that may be wanting to preserve their fertility if they have other things in life that they want to do first. So fertility preservation usually involves egg freezing, or is this something you've probably heard before, or oocyte freezing, and that's a service that City Fertility provides, and it's a service that we would harvest oocytes or eggs from the woman, and then that's banked in a freezer for up to 10 years, and so that gives the women peace of mind that their eggs at a younger age are there and they can be utilised at any stage to create embryos and then hopefully have a pregnancy from that. And I'm seeing a lot more women in their mid-20s, early 30s that are going through fertility preservation so that they can then not have to worry about any concerns about infertility as you go further into your 30s, which is we know that infertility increases, particularly over the age of 35, and so that they can then have a bit more comfort knowing that they can focus on their career, whether that be from a sporting career or whatever their endeavours. They have that opportunity to preserve their fertility so that they can do whatever they'd like. In saying that, the alternative would be to go back to the sport, and so I think making sure that you've got a huge network of professionals around you to support you through having a baby and then return to sport is something that is I think a really important thing, and that's something that also City Fertility are very keen to try and promote and support.
I suppose the greatest example in swimming was Lisa Curry, and she already had Jamie Lee and went to compete at the Commonwealth Games in 1990, and then very quickly had Morgan not long afterwards, and she'd just sort of done the one and then decided she wanted to have a crack at going to the Olympic Games again. And I think for me, my first team, I was 17 and I was actually rooming with Lisa, who was a mum at the time, and it was just a brilliant example of this is absolutely a possibility. I think none of us had really considered it because we'd grown up in the sport where most were successful very young and weren't even at that point, but there's been a real shift over the years, and our athletes have the opportunity to stay in the sport for so much longer. So I think we have had examples there, and I think it is nice to know it can be done. You do have to have a great support network. I think that's the one thing that I really noticed, even as a 17, 18-year-old watching that happen. But I think it's great to have the option.
And I suppose we've got probably time for one more question. And I guess before I do that, I might see if there's any questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Secondly, there's the work that Greg Shaw and
I think that deserves a round of applause, yeah. It is. It's not easy being vulnerable and open and sharing so authentically. So thank you for sharing that and for the update. I agree wholeheartedly. There's another question. Yes?
I'll concede that my background's football or soccer. And soccer parents are interesting to deal with. So I don't have a background knowledge of swimming parents.
I'm a firm believer that you don't educate in silos. So you don't just educate an athlete, you educate athlete, coach, parent, friends, across the board. And that's how we change the whole narrative, is by everyone getting the same information. And I think that there's absolutely opportunities to be able to do that, yeah.
And I mean, doctor and a nurse here, we're used to people being misinformed and thinking that their 10 minutes on Google is the same as an 8-year medical degree. So I'm very much in support of any education that can hold merit and is delivered by someone with merit that has evidence to be provided to our parents, our swimmers, their coaches, and even the broader community, just to continue to normalise that sort of stuff. So I think a lot of parents are always looking for ways they can support their children, and I know that I am. Always looking for ways that I can be a better parent and facilitate their future a bit better. So it would not be a wrong step at all.
Yeah, absolutely important. And I guess probably one of the momentum, ideas about Ignite Athlete, which has been created by City Fertility, is to create that platform to prevent misinformation, that if parents want to go and, learn a little bit more about what's normal and what's not normal and what's okay to talk about, we've got that platform there so that they can get the right information.
Is there any other question? Otherwise, I might ask one final one before we move to the next panel. In 30 seconds each, if you could give one piece of advice, based on your, with the benefit of hindsight now, having been an athlete and in your respective areas of expertise, what is one piece of advice you'd give current athletes about all of this to make their journey through a little bit easier?
Just find someone you trust and start that conversation.
That was quick. Yeah. So I guess probably following on from that, probably the topical thing at the moment for me is I've just had a baby 11 weeks ago. I finished football because I wanted to have a family, and I probably didn't even, being a gynaecologist, probably didn't even seriously consider fertility preservation as an option. Whereas I could probably still be out there running around with the girls. And I know physically I was very capable of doing that, but decided that I wanted to become a mother instead. That potentially I should have looked at options like that. I love my little girl out there, but I guess making sure that you've got all the options available, and don't think that you've only got one avenue that you need to go down.
Similar to Linley, I would say to talk more about it and talk more proudly about it. And not only that, but refer to your older alumni who have been through it, because it wasn't until I had been an athlete and felt pressures to look a certain way and, be stronger, lighter, faster, to then retiring, you got to maintain your body, then being pregnant, don't get too fat, and then actually delivering a baby and then feeling the pressure to get your body back from whatever external sources you get. It wasn't until that point that I went, oh my God, women are so much stronger than they give themselves credit for. Like, your whole body just goes through this emotional roller coaster and it doesn't stop. We've still got menopause ahead of us. So we're so much stronger than we get credit for.
That's a brilliant note to finish on. And before we give a round of applause, I would also like to say, are all the City Fertility people on this table over here? Is that where you all are? Yes. On behalf of Swimming Australia, we are so excited about this partnership, genuinely, really excited about the research and where it's going to go. So thank you. And on that note, please put your hands together for our wonderful panel.